In the heart of Eldoria, a kingdom known for its lush forests and shimmering rivers, King Aldric felt an unease growing within him. Though his rule was just and his people content, he feared he was losing touch with the very heart of his kingdom. One evening, under the cover of night, he left the castle dressed as a commoner, determined to experience his realm as an ordinary man. His wanderings brought him to the bustling town of Highpeak, where a small, unassuming blacksmith's forge caught his eye. The clang of metal on metal echoed in the night as a dwarf, stocky and mysterious, worked tirelessly. Aldric, drawn by the craftsmanship, introduced himself simply as Alden, a traveler. The blacksmith, Brogan, acknowledged the newcomer with a grunt, but allowed him to stay and watch. Aldric soon realized that Brogan's skill was unmatched, each strike purposeful, every creation a masterpiece. The king's curiosity grew. Why was such a talented blacksmith tucked away in a small town? As the night deepened, Brogan finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "You've got a keen eye for metalwork, Alden. Ever swung a hammer?" Aldric smiled. "Not like you, but I'm willing to learn." And so, an unlikely friendship began. Days turned into weeks, and Aldric found himself returning to Brogan's forge regularly. He learned the art of blacksmithing under the dwarf's watchful eye, discovering a sense of fulfillment in the simple, yet demanding work. Brogan, in turn, began to share stories of his past, of battles fought and friends lost, though he remained tight-lipped about his origins. Aldric noticed that Brogan was more than just a blacksmith. The forge was frequented by soldiers, scouts, and even spies. They sought Brogan's guidance, not just for weapons, but for counsel on matters of war and strategy. Brogan trained these men and women in secret, preparing them for battles that Aldric realized were quietly keeping the kingdom safe. The king was humbled. Here, away from the throne, he saw his kingdom's true protectors, ordinary people, led by a humble blacksmith. He marveled at how Brogan orchestrated their efforts without ever stepping onto the battlefield himself. Aldric's life at the forge became a blend of learning and leading. Though he was the king, he found solace in the simplicity of life as Alden. He began to understand the burdens carried by his people, the quiet struggles, and the unsung heroes like Brogan. He also saw how the blacksmith's guidance was pivotal in safeguarding Eldoria. One evening, as they shared a drink after a long day's work, Brogan turned to Aldric, his eyes sharp. "You're no ordinary traveler, Alden. What's a man like you doing in a place like this?" Caught off guard, Aldric paused before responding. "I needed to understand my kingdom in a way I couldn't from a throne." Brogan nodded slowly, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "And have you found what you're looking for?" "More than I ever imagined," Aldric replied sincerely. Rumors of unrest began to spread throughout Eldoria. Strange creatures were spotted in the dark forests, and whispers of a brewing war reached the ears of those in the know. The kingdom was under threat, but from whom or what, no one was certain. Brogan's forge became a hub of activity. Soldiers from distant outposts arrived, carrying reports and seeking Brogan's wisdom. Aldric, still in his guise as Alden, watched as Brogan strategized, crafting weapons and forming plans. The dwarf's influence was vast, yet his role remained hidden from the public eye. Aldric began to assist Brogan more actively, helping to train the soldiers and ensuring they were prepared for the coming storm. The king's disguise allowed him to fight for his kingdom without the trappings of royalty, and he relished the opportunity to serve in this new capacity. As the preparations for war intensified, a mysterious figure arrived at the forge. A tall, cloaked man with a presence that demanded respect. He was introduced as Magnus, Brogan's old mentor. Aldric sensed something off about him, but kept his suspicions to himself. Magnus spoke with Brogan in hushed tones, discussing strategies and old times. However, Aldric noticed a subtle tension in Brogan's demeanor. The usually confident dwarf seemed wary, even as he exchanged words with his former teacher. Later that night, Brogan confided in Aldric. "Magnus was a great teacher, but there's a darkness in him, Alden. I fear he may not be here to help us." The king's heart sank. Could it be that the true enemy was not from outside the kingdom, but within? Aldric vowed to uncover the truth, even if it meant revealing his own secret. Magnus lingered in High Peak, his presence unsettling to those who worked at the forge. Aldric began to investigate, quietly gathering information. He spoke to soldiers who had trained under Magnus and learned of his brilliant but ruthless methods. Some whispered that Magnus had dabbled in forbidden magic, seeking power beyond what a mortal should wield. Brogan, too, was growing uneasy. He confided in Aldric about the strange behavior of the creatures that had been reported in the forests, beasts that moved unnaturally, as if under some dark influence. Aldric couldn't shake the feeling that Magnus was somehow connected to these events. One evening, Aldric followed Magnus into the woods. He watched from the shadows as the man performed a ritual, dark energy swirling around him. The king's blood ran cold. Magnus was no longer just a mentor. He was the orchestrator of the kingdom's downfall. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Aldric knew it was time to take action. He revealed his true identity to Brogan, who, though surprised, accepted it with a grim nod. The two formed a plan to counter Magnus' growing influence. Brogan reached out to his network, calling upon old allies and former students. They began to gather in secret, forming a resistance against the dark forces Magnus was summoning. Aldric, now more determined than ever, used his royal connections discreetly to bolster their ranks. The kingdom's soldiers, unaware of the full scope of the threat, were trained and equipped under Brogan's watchful eye. Aldric made sure they were prepared for the battle ahead, knowing that the fate of Eldoria rested in their hands. The time for confrontation arrived. Magnus, confident in his growing power, began his assault on the kingdom, using the dark creatures he controlled to wreak havoc. The people of Eldoria were terrified, but they were not defenseless. Under the leadership of Aldric and Brogan, the soldiers fought back. The battles were fierce, but the training and preparation paid off. Brogan's strategies were instrumental, and the soldiers executed them flawlessly, turning the tide against the Magnus forces. In a climactic battle, Aldric and Brogan confronted Magnus in the heart of the Dark Forest. Brogan, armed with a weapon he had forged specifically to counter Magnus' magic, stood firm as Aldric led the charge with his soldiers. Together, they broke Magnus' hold over the creatures and brought an end to his dark reign. With Magnus defeated, peace returned to Eldoria. The kingdom slowly began to rebuild, the scars of battle healing over time. Aldric, though still king, often visited High Peak, where he and Brogan remained close friends. The people never knew the full extent of Brogan's role in saving the kingdom, and the dwarf preferred it that way. He returned to his forge, content to remain in the shadows, while Aldric ruled with a new understanding of his people. The king had learned that true strength did not lie in his title, but in the bonds of friendship and the quiet, selfless acts of those who served their kingdom without recognition. And in the heart of High Peak, the forge's fire burned ever brighter, a silent testament to the blacksmith who had helped save a kingdom from the shadows. I hope you enjoyed today's tale. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with fellow story lovers, and leave a comment below to let me know what you think.